The grocery store's neon sign flickered in the cold evening air as Marcus stepped outside, carrying a bag of warm food. He paused for a moment, spotting her, the homeless woman who always sat on the bench near the parking lot, her face weathered by time and hardship. She was hunched over, shivering in her thin, tattered coat, muttering something to herself. Without hesitation, Marcus approached her, the aroma of fresh bread and stew wafting from the bag. "Ma'am," he said gently, holding out the food, "I thought you might need this." Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "I don't need anything from you," she spat, her voice sharp and defensive. "Get away from me." Marcus didn't flinch. He placed the bag on the bench beside her. "It's cold tonight," he said softly, his tone calm. "You shouldn't have to go hungry." She glared at him, her lip curling. "Don't you have better people to help? People like you?" The words hung in the air like a slap. Marcus held her gaze for a moment, a flicker of pain crossing his face before it vanished. "Take care of yourself," he said quietly before walking away, his footsteps fading into the night. Eleanor stared at the bag of food, her stomach twisting with hunger. She wanted to throw it away, to prove she didn't need charity, especially from him. But the smell was irresistible. She grabbed the bag and tore it open, eating the food in quick, desperate bites. As she ate, a strange feeling crept over her. Who was this man? And why did he keep coming back despite her cruelty? She brushed the thought away, focusing instead on the warmth spreading through her body. For the first time in days, she felt full. Little did she know, this was just the beginning. Eleanor woke up the next morning feeling the kind of warmth she hadn't felt in years. Her stomach was no longer a hollow pit, and for once she wasn't haunted by dreams of cold and hunger. But then reality set in. She sat up on the bench, her thin blanket doing little to shield her from the biting wind, and glanced down at the crumpled bag from the night before. Her face hardened. She told herself she didn't owe him anything, especially not gratitude. She didn't need a stranger's pity, least of all his. But the man returned just as he had the night before. This time, she saw him coming. He held another bag, this one emitting the smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries. As he approached, she straightened her back, her expression stony. "Good morning," Marcus greeted her, his voice steady but kind. "I told you," she snapped, her voice cracking with anger. "I don't want your charity." "It's not charity," he replied calmly, setting the bag down on the bench beside her. "Everyone deserves to eat, that's all." Eleanor scowled at him, trying to find a retort, but the words caught in her throat. She hated how calm he was, how he didn't flinch or fight back. She wanted him to yell, to argue, to match her anger. But he didn't. "I don't need your help," she finally said, her tone quieter but no less sharp. "Go find someone else to bother." Marcus nodded slightly, his face unreadable. "Take care," he said simply before walking away again. Eleanor watched him go, her chest tightening with a mix of frustration and something else. She looked down at the bag. This time she didn't even wait for him to disappear from view. She tore it open, the smell of fresh croissants and black coffee making her stomach growl. As she ate, a part of her wanted to hate the man even more. But another part, a small, quiet part, wondered why he kept coming back. The third time Marcus showed up, Eleanor couldn't hold back her bitterness. "Why do you keep coming back?" she demanded, her voice louder than she intended. She didn't even bother waiting for him to put the bag down. "What's your angle? You trying to prove something?" Marcus stood still, his calm demeanor unwavering. "There's no angle," he said. "I just believe in helping when I can." She let out a sharp laugh, the sound bitter and hollow. "Helping? You think giving me a bag of food is going to fix anything? You don't know anything about me." "You're right," Marcus said, his tone steady. "I don't know you, but I do know what it feels like to be hungry, to feel invisible." That caught her off guard. She narrowed her eyes, studying him. You? Hungry? Don't make me laugh. He didn't laugh. For the first time, she noticed something in his expression, a shadow of something deeper, something he didn't say out loud. I grew up in this town, Marcus said, a long time ago, and I know what it's like to feel like the world has turned its back on you. Eleanor opened her mouth to argue, but the words didn't come. She didn't know why, but she believed him. There was something about the way he said it, something real. Why do you care? She asked after a moment, her voice softer now. About me? Because no one cared about me when I was in your shoes, Marcus said, and I promised myself if I ever had the chance, I'd do better. He set the bag down on the bench, his movements slow and deliberate. I'll see you tomorrow, he said before walking away. Eleanor sat there, staring after him, her thoughts racing. For the first time in years, she felt something she couldn't quite describe. It wasn't anger or bitterness. It wasn't even gratitude. It was something deeper, a small crack in the walls she had built around herself. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay awake on the bench, staring up at the stars, replaying Marcus's words over and over in her head. Who was this man? And why did he care so much? The next morning, she decided to follow him. She waited until he brought her another bag of food, this time with a small thermos of soup. She didn't say a word as he set it down and walked away. But as soon as he was out of sight, she grabbed her things and began trailing him from a distance. He didn't go far, just a few blocks to a large, unassuming building. The sign above the door read, Hope Community Center. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. She had heard of the place before. It was a shelter, a food bank, and a resource center for struggling families. She had always dismissed it as a place for other people. But now, watching Marcus walk through its doors, she felt an unfamiliar pang of curiosity. She hesitated, her feet rooted to the ground. A part of her wanted to turn back, to pretend she hadn't seen anything. But another part, a part she didn't recognize, pushed her forward. Inside, she saw Marcus talking to a group of volunteers, his voice calm but commanding. He wasn't just helping people, he was leading them, organizing, inspiring. The volunteers listened intently, hanging on his every word. Eleanor's heart pounded as she realized the truth. This man wasn't just some random do-gooder. He was someone important, someone who had built something meaningful. And he had been helping her. Eleanor stood frozen in the doorway of the community center, her heart pounding in her chest. She watched Marcus as he moved through the room, checking in with volunteers, offering words of encouragement, and occasionally breaking into a quiet laugh that lit up his face. He was at ease here, like he belonged, and it made her feel even more out of place. "Ma'am, can I help you?" a young volunteer asked, stepping up beside her. The girl looked no older than 20, her kind eyes scanning Eleanor's worn face with concern. Eleanor shook her head quickly, pulling her hood up. "No, I'm just leaving." She turned and bolted out the door before the girl could say another word. Back on the streets, her mind raced. She couldn't stop thinking about what she'd seen. The man who kept showing up with food wasn't just a kind stranger. He was the man behind the largest community resource center in town. How had she not known? Why hadn't anyone told her? For the first time, Eleanor felt a twinge of shame. This man, this Marcus, had been helping people like her for years, and she had treated him like dirt. She didn't know why, but it made her feel small. The next evening, Marcus found Eleanor in her usual spot, though she didn't greet him with her usual sharp words. Instead, she stared at the ground, silent and tense, as he set a bag of food down beside her. "Do you own that place?" she asked suddenly, her voice low. Marcus paused, surprised. "The community center? I helped start it, but it belongs to everyone who needs it." She looked up at him, her eyes narrowing. "Why would you do that? What do you get out of it?" Marcus sighed, taking a seat on the edge of the bench, keeping a respectful distance. "When I was a kid, I didn't have much. My mom worked 3 jobs to keep us fed, and we still went to bed hungry most nights. I remember sitting outside this same grocery store begging for scraps. People walked past me like I didn't exist. I told myself, if I ever made it out, I'd make sure no one else had to feel that way. Eleanor stared at him, her defenses wavering. She didn't know what to say. She had spent so much of her life blaming others for her problems, clinging to her bitterness like a shield. But hearing Marcus's story made her question everything. "You don't hate them?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The people who walked past you? The ones who didn't care?" Marcus shook his head. "Hate doesn't change anything. It just makes you bitter. I don't want to live like that. I'd rather use what I have to help." Eleanor swallowed hard, her throat tightening. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "You don't know what it's like for someone like me," she muttered. "You don't know what I've been through." Marcus didn't push her. He stood up, brushing the dust off his hands. "Maybe not," he said, "but I'd like to listen if you ever want to tell me." And with that, he left her alone with her thoughts. That night, Eleanor found herself remembering things she had tried to forget. Memories of her father, a man who preached hatred and division like it was gospel. Memories of her failed marriage, her financial ruin, and the years she spent blaming everyone but herself. She had always told herself that the world was against her, that people like Marcus were the enemy. But now, for the first time, she wondered if she had been wrong. The next morning, Eleanor made her way to the community center, clutching the edges of her tattered coat. She felt out of place the moment she stepped inside. The walls were bright and clean, decorated with photos of smiling families and children. Volunteers bustled around, organizing food, clothing, and supplies. She spotted Marcus across the room, talking to a group of teenagers who were packing care bags. Her chest tightened as she approached him, her hands trembling. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned, his face lighting up with surprise. "Eleanor, what brings you here?" She hesitated, the words catching in her throat. I wanted to say thank you. For the food, for everything." Marcus smiled, his expression warm and genuine. "You're welcome." "But I also—" She trailed off, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I'm sorry. For the things I said. For the way I treated you. I was wrong." For a moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he stepped closer, his voice gentle. "We all have things we're working through," he said. "What matters is what we do moving forward." Eleanor felt tears welling in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. She had spent so many years building walls around herself, but now, for the first time, she felt them start to crack. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor began volunteering at the community center. It wasn't easy. She was still grappling with her own bitterness and insecurities, but Marcus was patient with her. He showed her how to organize donations, serve meals, and talk to people who were struggling. Slowly but surely, Eleanor started to change. She began to see the humanity in others and in herself. Months later, Eleanor stood in front of a group of people at the community center, her hands trembling as she held a microphone. She was telling her story for the first time, sharing her journey from hatred and bitterness to compassion and redemption. Marcus stood at the back of the room, watching with quiet pride. He knew her journey wasn't over. It never really was, but she had taken the first steps, and that was enough. As Eleanor finished her speech, the room erupted into applause. She looked out at the crowd, her eyes meeting Marcus's. For the first time in years, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Eleanor's transformation didn't happen overnight. Though she volunteered regularly at the community center, there were still moments when her old bitterness surfaced, moments when she doubted herself, when she wanted to retreat back into the safety of anger. But Marcus never gave up on her. One evening, as the center was winding down for the day, Eleanor found herself alone with Marcus in the quiet kitchen. She watched him scrub pots and pans, his sleeves rolled up, his movements calm and deliberate. "You don't have to do that," she said, breaking the silence. "Don't you have people for that?" Marcus glanced over his shoulder, smiling. "I don't mind. It keeps me grounded." Eleanor hesitated, then spoke. "Why do you do it, Marcus? Really? I mean, you've got money, respect, a life you built from nothing. Why not just enjoy it?" Marcus set the pot down and turned to face her, leaning against the counter. "Because I remember what it feels like to have nothing, to feel like the world doesn't care if you live or die." He paused, his gaze softening. "And because I know that even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's life." Eleanor stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. "Do you really believe people can change?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "I've seen it, and I'm seeing it now." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. She looked away, focusing on the floor. "I don't deserve this," she muttered. "Any of it." "That's where you're wrong," Marcus said, his voice firm but gentle. "We all deserve a chance to be better." One day, as Eleanor was sorting donated clothes in the back room, she heard a familiar voice echo through the center. Her stomach clenched as she peeked out and saw a man she hadn't seen in years, her younger brother, Thomas. Thomas had always been the golden child of the family, their father's favorite, but his life had taken a darker turn after their father's death. The last time Eleanor had seen him, he'd been drowning in debt and blaming everyone but himself. "What's he doing here?" she asked Marcus in a hushed tone. "He came in for help," Marcus replied. "I didn't know he was your brother." Eleanor's initial reaction was anger. She wanted to confront Thomas, to accuse him of abandoning her when she needed him most. But as she watched him nervously explain his situation to a volunteer, she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before: vulnerability. For the first time, Eleanor understood what Marcus had been trying to teach her. She took a deep breath and walked over to Thomas. "Hey," she said, her voice steady but not unkind. Thomas turned, his eyes widening in surprise. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" "I work here," she said simply, "and I think we need to talk." That evening, Eleanor and Thomas sat together in a quiet corner of the center. Their conversation started awkwardly, but as the hours passed, the walls between them began to crumble. Thomas admitted his mistakes, apologizing for the years of silence and neglect. Eleanor, in turn, opened up about her own struggles, sharing things she had never said out loud before. By the end of the night, they were no longer strangers. They weren't entirely healed, but they had taken the first step toward mending their relationship. Word of Eleanor's transformation began to spread throughout the community. People who had once avoided her on the streets now approached her with curiosity and admiration. She was no longer that bitter old woman by the grocery store. She was someone who had turned her life around, someone who inspired others to believe in second chances. One evening, as the center hosted a fundraiser, a local news crew arrived to cover the event. They interviewed Marcus about his work, but when they learned about Eleanor's story, they insisted on talking to her as well. At first, she was hesitant. "I'm no hero," she said. "But you are," Marcus replied. "Your story could inspire someone else to change." With Marcus's encouragement, Eleanor shared her journey on camera. She spoke about her mistakes, her regrets, and the kindness that had saved her. By the end of the interview, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The news story aired the following week, and the response was overwhelming. People from all over the city reached out to the community center, offering donations and support. Some even showed up in person, inspired by Eleanor's story to volunteer or seek help themselves. Eleanor couldn't believe it. For so long, she had felt invisible, like her life didn't matter. But now, she saw the impact of her choices, the ripple effect of her transformation. One evening, as Eleanor and Marcus closed up the center, She turned to him and said, "I don't think I ever really thanked you. For everything." Marcus smiled. "You've thanked me plenty." "No, I mean it," she insisted. "You didn't just give me food. You gave me a reason to try again." Marcus looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Eleanor, you're the one who chose to change. I just gave you a little nudge." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "You gave me hope." Years later, the community center expanded, adding new programs and services to help even more people. Eleanor became one of its most dedicated volunteers, mentoring others who were struggling as she once had. Marcus continued his work quietly, never seeking recognition but always making a difference. And though life was never without its challenges, he remained a constant source of hope and compassion for everyone around him. As for Eleanor, she learned to let go of the bitterness that had once consumed her. She found purpose, connection, and a sense of peace she never thought possible. And in the end, she realized that Marcus was right. Everyone deserves a chance to be better. The story of a black man offering food to a racist homeless woman became more than just a tale of kindness. It became a testament to the power of empathy, forgiveness, and the belief that even the most broken lives can be rebuilt. If Eleanor's journey moved you, don't forget to like this video to spread the message of kindness and hope. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that remind us of the power of compassion. And share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, because together we can make a difference.